criminals aren't very smart. They like to run their mouths and things like that.
Sure.
And somebody could overhear it, and they could call us and say, "Hey, here's what he admitted to." So now when we bring him in, the suspect is generally the last person we bring in. So we have the puzzle together, except for that one piece.
Welcome. Welcome, Todd, to the podcast. And we were talking about before we hit record, we were talking about your career in the police force and law enforcement and how you got started there. And so if you could, I guess, recap that.
You want me to go from there?
Yeah.
Okay. I as I said, I graduated from Weber State
Yeah.
in criminal justice and then started applying to different agencies. First agency I applied with was Lakewood, Colorado. A friend of mine in college and I both went over there and tested with them. And you asked about the testing process. Usually it's a written exam. If you pass that, you do a physical agility test. If you pass that, you go on to like a polygraph and an oral board. And an oral board consists of usually 3 to 4 people that fire questions at you. You're by yourself, and they ask you different questions, and so
What's that like?
it's stressful.
Is it?
The whole process is stressful because you can't go any further unless you pass the one you're doing, like the written test. A lot of people get eliminated out of the written test.
What are they looking for on, like, what's their criteria they're looking for? Is it
I have no idea. I really don't, because a lot of it you would think would be like law enforcement related.
right?
Some of them are, and some of them aren't. So that's why I say I have no idea. They just have a list of like 100 questions that you have to take a test on.
What type of questions do they, like, personal type questions, or is it?
Yeah, some personal, not as much. Maybe 4 or 5, just getting to know you a little bit. But just mainly, they'll throw out scenarios of different police type scenarios. What would you do if
Oh, I see.
type things. Some of them have math on it, which I told you I wasn't very good at that. But so that's kind of weird. Like some will have you have a incident at such a location. You're here. It's over here. What's your quickest way to get to it?
Oh,
So you're
okay.
looking at maps, just different
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Interesting.
But and then the oral board is just basically questions of what you know about law enforcement. Have you ever worked with law enforcement? That type of thing.
And you had experiences trying to get the law enforcement to chase you as a kid, so
Exactly.
that probably helped.
Yeah. And in college at Weber State, my last semester, I was a reserve officer for Layton PD.
Okay.
And so that kind of gave me a step on my application. It looked good that he had some police service.
Experience,
Yeah. After that, I didn't get hired with Lakewood, so I came back home and I was living in Kaysville, Utah. I applied at Mesa PD, Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, Yavapai County Sheriff's Office, and Chandler. And so I went through that process with all of them.
Oh, you have to do it every time.
Yeah,
Okay.
every time. I got a call from Mesa PD and said that there was 400 applicants. They told me I came out number 7, and they took 6, and they said we'll be taking another batch soon. You'll get hired. I said, well, it was funny because I got a call from Yavapai County, and they said that I was hired. I would be living in, I don't know if you've heard of Seligman, Arizona.
No, never heard
So
of it.
on your way to Kingman, the old Route 66.
Okay. Yeah.
And Peach Springs is right there, and they said you'll be the resident deputy for $950 a month. And when you go through the academy, which you have to go through in 2 years, you'll get a $50 raise, and there's nothing there. And so I thought to myself, I said, I don't want to work there. But shortly thereafter, that same day, I believe, I got a call from the sheriff's office, and they made me an offer, and I took that. So back to Mesa PD, I told them that I'd already been hired by the sheriff's office. Take me off your list, which it was a good career move for me to go to the sheriff's office.
What's the difference between the sheriff's office versus like a police department?
Police department is like for the, let's take City of Mesa. They patrol the city wherever it's inhabited by city residents. That's theirs. We have all the unincorporated areas of the county.
Oh, I see.
So, and we have jurisdiction in Mesa, in Phoenix. You know,
Right.
but our jurisdiction is mainly the unincorporated areas.
Oh, I see. So do you guys focus on similar things, or is it kind of
Oh yeah.
okay?
Yeah, it's just basic police work.
Okay. So, but just kind of filling the gaps where there's maybe not a structured police department for a city.
Correct.
Okay. So is that, I guess, like Queen Creek, for example, they didn't have a set up police department. Was Maricopa County a part of taking care of that?
Yes, we took care of Queen Creek. We took care of Sun Lakes, all the south area, anything south down to Hunt Highway, which is the southern border before it's Pinal County. We took care of that. We took care of the Tempe River bottom, East Mesa. When I was first started, when I was in patrol, East Mesa started at about Higley
Okay.
and went east to the Meridian line. So there's a lot of area. And then on the west side of Phoenix, it's, largely unincorporated. So there's a lot of areas there.
And when did you get into the sheriff's department? Like what time frame?
I hired on September of '84, went through the academy in December, graduated in March of '85, and started in patrol.
Okay. So you've really been involved in kind of being the sheriff's department as the county and city has really grown.
Oh, absolutely.
And what was that experience like when it goes from what I understand, I don't think I was even born then. What was probably kind of a more of a small town area to what it is now today.
Yeah, it's definitely like today. My sister lives out off Ellsworth and Brown, which is way out east, and I go out there now, and a lot of that is incorporated by the city now. A lot of it's Mesa PD, and it's just a shock to see all the new homes. You used to be able to tell the county because there was no curbs and gutters
Right.
and sidewalks
Yeah.
in those areas. So, but now where you see that, it's city.
Yeah. So it's really, what would you say crime has increased a lot since when you started at the police department or the sheriff's department?
I think so. I would say that crime has become definitely more violent with drugs, with gangs. The illegal population comes across and brings drugs, and a lot of deaths and things like that.
Yeah. Huh. I was reading somewhere that, and I was kind of surprised by this, but I guess Arizona or Phoenix and Mesa are like the number one cities in the U.S. for drugs. I don't know if that's a true statement. I read that somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know.
Is that would that just because the border, is that what that
Absolutely.
the primary cause of that?
Absolutely. It's so easy to go across and go down and get drugs and bring them back across, and they have all kinds of trying to think of the smuggling is a lot bigger now than it ever was, and now with President Trump in there, the border is shut down quite a bit. So but before that, during my career, it was rampant with crime.
Really? Huh. Is that and from administration to administration, does that vary quite a bit, or was it pretty consistent all the way through until of late it's maybe stemming?
I think it was consistent with our department until my last 6 or 7 years. It changed because the sheriff's office got in trouble for illegal immigration raids and that, and we were put under a court order.
Oh.
So that was difficult to work with. They wanted it stopped, and
Okay. Is that a common thing for sheriff's departments to be put on court order for that, or how's that?
No, our sheriff and chief deputy were very aggressive in that area, and most of them aren't.
Oh, I see.
So,
Was that Joe Arpaio? Is that who the sheriff was?
yes.
At the time? Okay, that makes sense. Um, so I'm curious. I kind of want to go back a little bit between. You said you went to college and studied a little bit of law enforcement. Then you went on your mission. Did your mission affect or help make you a decision towards law enforcement in any fashion, or what was that time? Because I think there's some development in those years.
No, I don't think so. I think that what my mission did was made me grow up, made me, realize what was important in life, and getting married soon after my mission. Those values were still with me and with my wife, so that's why that affected Margie, where she said, I want you to be active in church and that. So that's why I made that agreement with her that I would stay active and have done so.
Is that pretty difficult as in law enforcement to schedule wise to maintain and manage that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of, we rotated when I first came on in patrol, we rotated every 3 months, and you either went from day shift to swing shift to graveyards.
Okay.
And I remember, because I'd made that commitment and because I wanted to be at church, working graveyards on Saturday night, getting off at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, getting home by, say, after paperwork, 8 o'clock, and having church service at 9 o'clock. I was there. I was a zombie, but I was there because I made that commitment.
Yeah.
But a lot of police officers, it's sad, good LDS people don't, they let the job get in the way of their religious beliefs.
Sure.
And I had one out of 37 years in law enforcement, I had 1 3-month shift where I wasn't able to go to church. Mm-hmm. But I had to do some things to finagle. Like I said, when I worked all night on Saturday, I was still there at church.
Right.
And then I'd have to, go get some sleep and go on Sunday night again. But so my belief always was you can make it happen. You can do what you want to do if you want to be active.
Right, for sure. And do you feel like that that commitment to your wife was really key in helping maintain that and like hold that goal?
I guess I'd have to ask you the question of, when I was your priest quorum advisor, was I there?
I think you were, so yes.
No, it was a great commitment that I made because it's kept me active in the church.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing is, our beliefs.
Absolutely. So in your time at the sheriff's office, obviously you kind of started at one level, and then I know you were a detective at one point, and I'm not really familiar with the positions you held from there. What were those positions you held, and what was it like kind of working up the ranks of the sheriff's office?
I was in patrol for about 5.5 years, just a regular patrol deputy in the car out in the streets. When I became a detective, we had, I'm sure you're too young to remember, the Buddhist temple. We had 9 Buddhist monks that were executed out in West Phoenix.
Really?
At their temple.
Huh.
And 2 kids came in and were trying to rob the place and ended up shooting all the monks. So all of our homicide detectives, except for one, went out there to work that case because it was a major case, and you can imagine the media from the land where they came from and were wondering what was going on. And so our main detectives were out there with a lot of our leadership. I would just got put into detectives at District 1, which is Mesa, and that detective job would be doing just regular crimes such as burglaries, robberies, theft, assaults, sexual assaults, that kind of thing was what the district detectives worked. I was only there about a week when they said they needed somebody to go downtown and help with the homicide unit.
Mm.
And so since I was the new guy, they told me that I was going down there, and I went down there, and it was the best move in my career. I was a homicide detective for 6.5 years. I later became a sergeant for 4 years over the homicide unit, and then a lieutenant for about 4.5 years over the homicide unit.
Mm.
Homicide is where we investigated murders
Mm-hmm.
and very serious crimes such as robberies to some point, especially when there was an aggravated assault that looked like the person might die.
Right.
So I did that for a long time. Really enjoyed that.
Yeah. What? Because you said that was kind of that first one led to obviously choosing that as your career path. What about that really spoke to you and kind of interested you?
When you work in homicide, you're working the ultimate crime. And to me, it was like a jigsaw puzzle.
Mm.
It's like, putting the pieces together and everything, all the clues together.
Yeah.
And that a lot of ours in the sheriff's office, we would get a dead body out in the field, out in the desert somewhere, that hikers had come across or whatever. We'd get called out there. So we were working everything backwards. Because usually, if you have a homicide in a house, you have some suspects already, and it's a controlled scene.
Yeah.
Our scenes out in the desert, a lot of them didn't have IDs, so we had to get them ID'd. We had to work the crime scene out there, and then they would come. Then we would start trying to figure out who the guy was. If his fingerprints were in the system, we were then able to get a name and try to do background and find out where he lived, who his friends were, who his family was,
Yeah.
and work it backwards. So it was just, I really enjoyed it a lot.
Was it pretty difficult on a lot of the cases to solve, or were some of them open and shut, closed, and?
No, most of the cases with the sheriff's office take quite a while to solve.
Mm. With that one with the monks, and you found out it was a couple kids trying to rob the temple of where they were at. Well, how did that resolve? How did you guys find that out? Okay, cool.
Just through investigation. I wasn't out there, so I don't really know. I assisted that case on some interviews when they found people who they thought did it at first.
Okay.
But I didn't have much to do with that one.
Mm. So with the cases, as you work through them, what would you say is kind of the key things you do or skills you have to learn or gain as you to be a detective? Because I think that's, for a lot of people, really intriguing. That they maybe watch a show where there's a detective or something like that, but they don't really have a real grasp into what's it like to be a detective, and what skills are you utilizing, learning, and
for us, I think a lot of it is learning to work as a team, learning to on-the-job training more than anything. You go out and you start doing it, and you get assignments. Your sergeant or lieutenant gives assignments out, and you follow up on those assignments. You might be if we know who the person is on the ground immediately, somebody's going to be sent to the family's house and interview them and see what they can tell us when the last time they saw him. That's so mainly on the job training.
Mm.
And I think it's funny because a lot of police officers have it in their mind that education doesn't help, isn't necessary. I totally disagree with that. I think my degree in law enforcement and criminal justice, because I had a lot of detective type classes, criminal law, and that type of thing. So I think that was helpful for me.
What aspects of your classes do you think kind of played through in the real world experience?
Well, one that I took at Weber State was called courtroom demeanor, and that's teaching you what you should be doing in the court and what not to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that was apparent when I was at court. I always had those memories. criminal law, learning the law. You can't go out there and enforce the law if you don't know
Right.
about it. And all this stems from before you're actually on the road. You go through mine was a 12-week academy at Phoenix Regional Academy.
Okay.
And there you're being taught classes for, that 12-week period. You're just in school all day long, learning report writing, learning investigations, learning first aid, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So you have that background before you actually hit the road.
Hmm. So there is a fair amount of training when it comes to being in law enforcement, it sounds like.
Absolutely. There's a lot of training.
And would you, like, even after your kind of initial college and then initial training, is there a lot of on-the-job training as well?
Yes, you're in training constantly. There's classes they offer all the time. There's in homicide. I was lucky enough to be able to go to seminars in Las Vegas 3 or 4 times, a week-long seminar where you had professionals come in and teach you different subjects, and I was lucky enough to do that. Like I said, 3 to 4 times.
Hmm. Very cool. Yeah, because I think a lot of people think, especially nowadays, that police officers aren't trained, they don't receive training, and so I think to hear that, like, police officers, law enforcement get trained a lot is a...
Oh, it's constant training.
Yeah. Does training kind of change over time too? Because like you said, you started in the 80s, and now, when did you retire from the law enforcement?
The end of 2021.
Okay, so pretty recently, the last couple years.
3 years ago.
So did the training kind of evolve over time too?
Oh yeah, new techniques that are out there. You learn about them. Training is a lot of policing, which I'll say in the old days is totally different now because of civil rights movements.
Sure.
So they've had to back off on some of the old techniques now. So yeah, it constantly changes.
How does law enforcement and police officers and detectives, how do they deal with things like that, like civil rights movements and things that come up of that nature? Is it kind of the department makes a decision? Is it kind of a county decision? How's that work?
It's through the sheriff's office department and other agencies that have input, like ACLU. They're a protector of people's rights, so they have input in there. But it's interesting because I would say most police officers, myself included, don't like change very much. We like to do it the way we've done it and
Sure.
things like that. So the changes are difficult, but some of them are needed and some of them I would say, are ridiculous.
Sure. Well, I feel it's probably challenging too. It's, you're going out there, obviously it's not, you're putting your life on the line at the service of others. And if you find a strategy or a way to do that effectively that works, and, you want to do that because that's the effective way to go about it. And so if there's people from the outside who don't know and haven't experienced it firsthand, it's probably frustrating if they try to change things or adapt it when you're going, that's not a very effective way to operate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're correct.
I'd love to hear some experiences that maybe stood out while working in law enforcement, or stories or anything like that. I want to respect, obviously, you're sharing what you feel comfortable sharing. But is there anything throughout your career? I'm sure you had a lot of experiences that were, impacted you one way or another.
I did. I have to be careful because
Sure.
some of them that, one I guess I could talk about is one of the homicides I was a sergeant at. I don't remember if you remember back out east, there was a little baby that was burned. His father set the little baby on fire.
Oh, wow.
Left her out there off the side of the road, and that was a very difficult case to work. As a sergeant, I had to make sure that my detectives were okay. If they needed any kind of help, counseling or anything like that, that was offered to them. But it was just a difficult case, but we got the we found what happened. It was a divorce type situation where the mother wasn't going to let him have rights to the baby, and so he took the baby and went out and did what he did. He's now he's been in prison for quite some time. That was a case that was anytime you had a homicide where there was children was very difficult. But you just had to go out and do the investigation. You made sure you did it correctly so that the person who did it wasn't going to get released from prison.
Right.
Things like that. So I had one, I'll tell you, kind of a funny story that happened to me in patrol. I was, at the time, Rural Fire, we assisted them. They were the fire department that was there, and most of their houses were manned by one person. So we would give them a lot of help when they had a medical call or a fire. We would be there to help keep the crowds out. Well, on this one medical issue or call that we came to, the firemen got there and we got there, and I had a trainee with me. And since he's one man, this man needed CPR. And this is back in the days when you basically had a pair of gloves to wear, and that was it. No face masks, no nothing like that, like you see on TV today.
Yeah.
So this man needed CPR. The fireman started doing what he was doing, trying to get the mouth, the ambu bag over the mouth so he could help him breathe. And I'm doing chest compressions and everything. Well, the guy vomits in this mask, and vomits kind of goes everywhere. And I'm sitting there thinking, why am I doing this? This is where my trainee needs to be. So I call him in the house, and he comes in, and he starts these chest compressions and that. And in the meantime, the smell has got me. So I go out, the family's all on the front porch. I go out around the back of the house, and I'm gagging like I want to throw up, but I can't.
Yeah.
So I come back in, and I'm standing in the doorway about 6 feet away from the body, just watching my trainee and that, and trying to comfort the family as much as I can. And I'm looking in the deal, and all of a sudden, as the paramedic squeezes the bag, he throws up again. And in my eyesight, I can see something coming right towards me, and this little noodle lands right here on my lip, right there.
Oh, man.
Todd is running around the house now, trying to vomit big time, but I go back to I get my wits about me. I go back to the house, and it's funny because the paramedic that's doing the bag, he's bald-headed, and he's got a noodle on the top of his head that looks like a Z-shaped about 2 inches long. So everybody was covered, basically, but that's just kind of a funny story that stuck in my memory. And everyone I tell that story to, they laugh and think it's pretty funny.
Yeah. What? Why was he throwing up? Was it just?
I think that I don't know.
Just
why
choking or something?
Just a reaction, I guess. I don't know.
Did he? What?
Probably pushing on his chest and that,
Right.
doing CPR and.
That's funny. What was he okay, or what kind of ended up being?
He passed away.
Oh, okay.
CPR was it's very, very important. It saves a lot of lives, but depending on how soon you get to the person.
Right.
Most of the time that I participated in CPR or had an incident with that, most of the time they passed away. Because to get to them in the county is a long ride, and then getting them transported to the hospital, most of them pass away.
Yeah.
So.
And so, what would you say typical administering needed in the first 5 minutes, or is it kind of a?
I don't know what they would say on that. I know it's quick. Yeah.
Quick. That is funny. So you mentioned briefly how, especially cases with kids or children, it can, some of your officers, you'd want to check on them, see if they're doing okay. Would you say trauma and those type of things is pretty common in the workforce and for law enforcement, of dealing with those type of, just seeing horrific things that you wouldn't have expected, and what is the department or what do they typically do in those type of situations?
They're offered counseling, and the problem is most police officers that I worked with feel that they're strong enough to not do that. So most of them don't take advantage of that. And a lot of that is team building, supervising. That was my job, to supervise and counsel and just check and see if they needed it. And then a few days later, I would make sure that they were okay and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But most officers that I worked with didn't take advantage of that.
Yeah. Is that just, why would that be? Why is that? Just they felt like they could handle it, or?
Because we're strong, macho men. Everyone thinks that they can do it on their own.
Yeah. Have you found in with coworkers and colleagues that eventually it builds up and it can be detrimental, or what's kind of been the?
I think there's a lot of people in law enforcement that probably come out of law enforcement with PTSD. They don't know it during their career necessarily,
right?
But after their career is over, I have a good friend of mine that was diagnosed with it, and you would have never thought that he had it.
Right.
But he was involved in a shooting where he shot a person, and just from that one incident, he was in homicide with me. He was my lieutenant when I was a sergeant, and saw all kinds of things in that. But that one incident caused him to probably relate on that and think about it too much.
Yeah.
But so a lot of that would happen.
Yeah. Was it typically like just the mind trying to work through whatever it was, whatever the scenario was?
You always wonder in law enforcement, was there a better way? Could I have done something different to make a different end result? At the time, you're making, most of the calls, you're making split-second decisions.
Sure.
And so afterward, you can be Monday morning quarterbacked by your superiors or by people on your squads, people that were there at the incident, yourself, that type of thing.
Oh, I see. That makes sense. I didn't think about it in that way. Is it pretty common, like your friend who was in that shootout type of scenario? Is that a pretty common experience, or would you say most officers never go through that?
I don't know of anyone else that has been diagnosed with that. They probably have gone through it or go through it or whatever, but I don't know of anyone.
Okay. Is getting into a shootout type confrontation in law enforcement, at least in this local area, is that pretty common here or not? Not necessarily.
There's not very many officer-involved shootings. It's getting more and more common. I think if you watch the news, Phoenix PD is involved in a lot of officer-involved shootings, but they're dealing with a different crowd too. They're different, a lot more, like I said, drug traffickers and that type of thing. But we investigated, when I was a sergeant and a lieutenant, we investigated officer-involved shootings, and in 10 years that I did that, there was probably, I'm just guessing, 5, 6 maybe. So we didn't have very many.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. I have a question about, we were talking earlier just about this generation of young people and how, I don't know how you'd want to state it, but it may be a softer generation of young people. And just from the experience you talked about with law enforcement, what do you think in your opinion, like what do young people need to learn now to try and deal with tough realities of life? And I think law enforcement's a good example of that. It's a career that involves a lot of tough, real experiences, and kind of have to have grit and strength and ability to go in and deal with tough situations.
The best way that I can put it, I believe, is people need to learn how to do hard things,
Hmm.
whether it's going into a career, whether it's going to college, whether it's anything we do. For example, um, it's very easy to go to college and to go to a class and a month later say, I don't want to go to this, and just quit.
Yeah.
I'm noticing in law enforcement that we put a lot of people through the academy, and the academy is a huge cost. When I went through, it was like $40,000. I think it's much more than that now. But we have the younger generation. They'll come out, they'll go through the academy, come out and work for 2 or 3 years and just quit.
Hmm.
And they quit because it's hard, it's difficult. A supervisor yelled at me, I can't take that. So they quit.
Yeah.
And they'll go do something, a wholly different career. So I think that's the best thing that parents especially can teach their kids is learn how to do hard things. My family, and um, I couldn't be more proud of my daughter and my son because in every job they've ever had, they're hard workers.
Yeah.
And I like to think that that's attributed a little bit to me from what they saw me doing
Yeah.
in that. So that would be the main thing is learn how to do hard things.
Hmm. How did you, as a parent, and then also, growing up, how do you feel like you learned how to do hard things?
I think that first off, going on a mission,
Mm.
that wasn't easy. I was in Eastern Canada, and our goal was to knock 55 hours of doors a week.
Hmm.
And if you think of that, that's a long time each day out there just knocking doors. The average missionary baptized like 1.5 people per their 2 years.
Wow.
So teaching was not a lot. We got in and taught a lot of first discussions, but that was usually the end of it. So that taught me hard work. I had a dad that I worked for a friend of ours. He had kind of a lumber business, and I would drive to Phoenix and pick up lumber and then take it back to contractors and deliver it in the Prescott area or horse feed down to Skull Valley, whatever. But I never had a schedule with him. He would just call in the morning and say, hey, I need you to come into work today. Well, there were many times that I heard that phone ring in the morning and I just wasn't going to answer it because I didn't want to go into work that day. Well, I had a dad that answered it every time, and he'd come into my room and say, hey, Dave needs you to go to work today, get up and go, that type of thing. So I learned from him. I learned from watching my parents. My mom ran a daycare center up in Prescott, and my dad worked at the bank, and I saw them work. My mom worked from 6 in the morning till 6 at night, practically until she was 80 years old.
Wow.
My dad retired from the bank after 35 years, so I had parents that worked and then very active in their church callings, which creates a lot more work and things like that. As a parent, I don't know, my wife, probably I'd have to give her credit. She taught the kids how to work, especially when I was not there. If I was on a homicide, I could be out. One homicide that I investigated I was out there for 36 hours straight before I came home.
Wow.
And it was funny because as I was driving home, it was out west, as I was driving home, later that day, the next day, I couldn't even tell you how I drove home because I was so tired.
Yeah.
I had one of my sergeants told me, and this was after the Buddhist temple, he'd been out there for, I think, 51 hours, 56 hours, something like that straight. And he was driving home. He lived out in East Mesa. He said he's driving down the carpool lane, and all of a sudden he sees red lights behind him. He's getting pulled over, and he has no idea why. And so he pulls over, and he asked the officer, "What's wrong?" And he goes, "Well, don't you think driving 15 miles an hour in the HOV lane is a little bit slow?" And so your mind kind of shuts down in that on those types of things because you've been using it so much, I guess.
Yeah.
But I can't attribute any one thing to raising my kids that other than I'd give the credit to Margie.
Yeah. I I wonder a little bit too with like how did you manage, you know, because just mentioning there, you know, you could be out on a homicide case for 36 hours or however long, and you're, you know, you made a commitment to go to church as well and be active in the church, and you know, life has its many challenges. I think everyone knows that. So how did you balance all of it and balance being a dad, working your career, moving up the ranks in the sheriff's office, and then also being, you know, at church and having a call. How did you manage all of it? Because I think many people, young people, and even people who are older, you know, that's hard. Life is difficult that way.
Truthfully, I don't know. I really don't know. Other than, like I said, the church part was easy because I'd made a commitment to my wife that I would be there. And, you know, in our church, it's all volunteers. So when you receive a calling, you try to do your best in that calling. So
Right.
I worked a lot of off-duty jobs, meaning that you work your regular job and you'd go to, like, I used to work Golfland. We used to call it Golfland PD because we were there so much every weekend, and out on Friday and Saturday nights, and then through the summer every night. But
What would you do at?
just security.
Oh, security. Okay.
Security for the park. You know, if they had a problem, we would address the problem for them or
Right.
things like that. But I worked a lot of off duty. And like I said, at that time, Margie, my kids were older. Margie basically raised them.
Yeah.
So, but altogether, it was just desire, I guess. Just wanted to do my best in what I was doing.
Yeah. Were there any moments when, and I guess this is probably everyone has moments, but, you know, any moments that you look back going, man, that was really challenging or difficult, and now that you have kind of the, you know, they always say, you know, hindsight is 20/20, I think is the phrase. You know, maybe it was a challenging moment or difficult where, you know, it was like, man, that was really difficult, but looking back, you're like, okay, you know, this is what I learned from it, and I'm glad that experience happened.
I think one thing the sheriff's office did for me was taught me commitment.
Mm.
You know, a lot of people nowadays, like I said, they work 2 or 3 years and just quit because it's too tough or they don't like it or somebody yelled at them, that type of thing. For me, it was I wanted to make a career of it.
Yeah.
I grew up with parents that had careers, and I think in my generation, most people got into something that made a career. They, you know, you may have to switch jobs or something like that, but
Sure.
looking back on it, no, I have no regrets of working with the sheriff's office at all. I love the sheriff's office. I love my responsibilities there, and the one regret I will tell you that I had when I was in Homicide as a detective, Devin was in Little League, and because we were so busy working on homicides, and you never know if a scene is going to last an hour, 10 hours, 3 days,
Sure.
whatever. Well, in 2 years' time, I was only able to see one of his games each year.
Yeah.
So that's a regret because I should have been the dad that was out there coaching my son.
Sure.
Is what I would have liked to have done. So that is a regret that I do have.
Sure. Yeah. Just but it probably is workload. You know, just working those jobs that plays a big factor.
Well, and the kids later understood because we've done a lot of things with our kids, like vacation wise and family
Right.
vacations, and that's why you work the off duty jobs and that, and so, I mean, they got to go to California once, twice a year. You know, we'd always spend their October vacation over there, or, you know, my kids have got to travel a lot. We took them to D.C. and New York, and just good times. But it was
Right.
all because of that I was willing to work the extra, because I made enough money to pay for our bills and things like that and live.
Yeah.
But to do extra stuff, I had to bring in extra money.
Right. Right. Well, and I think that's always been interesting in talking to different people, how, you know, everybody's got different life scenarios and how they make it work. And I think you made a good point. It's like, if you want to make it work, you can make it work. If you don't want to make it work, then you'll find reasons not to make it work.
Right.
So I know we've talked a little bit about this already, but I'm kind of curious, when you're like on a homicide scene, and you mentioned sometimes it can take an hour, sometimes it can take 10, 30, however many. What dictates that? What are you, as a detective, when you go on the scene, what are you looking for? What are you trying to, you mentioned those puzzle pieces that you're trying to piece together. Just take us through the mind of a detective when you go to a homicide scene. What are you trying to figure out? What are you looking for? What are you trying to piece together?
Okay. Let's take a desert scene. We get called out. There's a body there. The finders, people that found the body, they need to be interviewed. So we'll shoot a detective over to them to get their statements of what they saw, when they saw it, time, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's usually, we have crime scene techs that a detective, either one or two detectives, go with the crime scene tech, and they work their way up to the body. In a desert scene, what they're doing is they're looking for clues around the body, and they have placards, yellow placards, that there's a cigarette butt, they'll put number 1 there. They'll put number 2 on a hairbrush. Just anything that could be related. We don't know if it is or not, a beer can, anything, and they work their way up to the body.
Yeah.
So that takes a long time working that area, looking for everything. They finally get to the body, and everything's photographed in place, and that. So that takes a lot of time. You're waiting there. Now we get to the body and basically start looking at it, start examining the body as much as we can to figure out what happened. We have to roll the body over to see if there's damage to the back or whatever, or if there's anything under the body, that type of thing. Sometimes you'll find a gun under the body or something like that. That could mean it was a suicide, not a homicide.
Right.
So you have to just work different things. So that's what takes so long. And then you do a search, and even a broader search out of the regular crime scene to make sure you didn't miss anything. So, and then it's like I said, if the body has ID on it, then we can start. That's part of the investigation, where we'd send somebody to the address on it and see if that's their relatives. We have people that are back at the office that we can send information to, and they can run up profiles. Like, they give them that name, and they can say, yeah, it shows he still lives at this house, or no, his last known address is over here, that type of thing. So
I see.
that's part of the initial investigation.
So then once you leave a crime scene, so you get all that information, and then, you know, maybe you try to find the family, search and do interviews. What's kind of that post-initial crime scene investigation?
Let me back up just a second.
Yeah.
I had a sergeant that told me that when we were leaving the investigation, he was my lieutenant, I was the sergeant, and I had detectives that were working. And I said, I guess we're just about done. And he goes, just about done, or you are done? And I said, well, I think they're done. They're packing up and everything. He goes, you realize that crime scene, if you came back tomorrow, it's going to be changed, because you have rain, you have wind, could blow things around. You need to make sure that you're done.
Yeah.
So I went back to my guys and said, are we done? Are we sure we're done? Type thing. Because there's no coming back to it,
Right.
to the original deal. So that would be first. Now, I'm not. Can you restate what?
Oh yeah, yeah. So after that initial crime scene, you do take the pictures. You make sure you're completely done. What's post that? Obviously, you're trying to find some family members, talk to and interview to people. But what's that post initial crime scene investigation? What's that? What's that like?
Well, normally, I'm going to give you the easy scenario on it. If we find family members, let's say as ID, we can find a family member. Usually, they'll be able to give us people that he ran with, people that he hung around with. Sometimes they can tell us that so and so was after him, so to speak, and that. So after we interview the family and that, then the investigation, the chase begins of being able to try to find out investigative leads, suspects, witnesses, that type of thing. And they just, once you get to the first deal, they're going to give you names. So it just balloons out from there.
Right. So all the pieces. So you just kind of start collecting pieces and people and.
It's like that jigsaw puzzle. Everything's a piece to that jigsaw puzzle.
And when do you, I guess after it starts to balloon, and then what's kind of the phase of then after you have all this information, piecing it down to really identify a prime suspect? And maybe some cases it's easier than others, but what are the pieces that you use to conclude and come to the conclusion of who you think it might be?
Usually it comes through witnesses. A lot of them come through. Criminals aren't very smart. They like to run their mouths and things like that.
Sure.
And somebody could overhear it, and they could call us and say, "Hey, here's what he admitted to." So now when we bring him in, the suspect is generally the last person we bring in. So we have the puzzle together, except for that one piece. So he comes in, and you either get him to admit or he'll deny adamantly.
Yeah.
But at that point, you really already know the case is done.
Right.
You don't necessarily need him as much. So we'll take his DNA. Now DNA is a big thing, so we'll get a court order to be able to swab his mouth and take DNA and compare it to what we found out at the crime scene.
Right.
And things like that.
Is it pretty successful? Because, you see in movies and things like that, sometimes they make the criminals out to be really, advanced and slick and really wipe down a scene. Were there any crime scenes that really baffled you and were like, man, this is just hard to solve, confusing, can't get a lead? Or was it most of the time it was pretty,
well,
you could find something?
I can tell you one that was difficult. We had 9 different murders out at off the I-10, and they were all illegal aliens at different during probably a 6-week period.
Okay.
And my squad, lucky enough, only got one of them because those were difficult to work. We never got the body identified. So that body, we did the investigation, everything went to the. No, I take that back. We did get him identified through fingerprints, but he went to the medical examiner's office, family in deep Mexico, and we were never able. We tried to contact him through the Mexican consulate. They wanted nothing to do with him. So that case was, I don't know if baffling is the right word, but it was, it was difficult because that case, you tried to solve all of them.
Right.
And that one's on your shelf as an unsolved case.
Right.
So.
And that was just because of the kind of international
logistics.
Yeah. Huh. That's interesting.
And he was up here running drugs and that, and the family knew that, and they were involved in drugs also. So they were just like, it's a dime a dozen.
Right. They're just like, let him
go.
Let that story go. Yeah. Huh. Interesting. I guess that's true where we live on the border. That would be something that occurs. Is that a pretty common thing? Maybe not in Maricopa County per se, but just in general?
We have a lot of illegals across the border like that if they're found dead, they don't have any idea at all.
Right.
And if they don't have fingerprints in the system or anything like that, it's just an unsolved case.
Right.
And we do, the agencies in Arizona get a lot of those.
Right. It's probably pretty impossible to do anything if you can't identify
Right.
the individual.
All right. But you still work the crime scene just as you work any other crime scene. So it's very thorough. It's just it just ends at that point.
Yeah. Do when they take the body, do they typically take it back to like an autopsy and then you're getting information from that as well?
Yeah, they all go to the medical examiner's office. They do an autopsy on every one of them. We're the detective, the detective that's assigned to be the case agent. That's the one that's in charge of that crime, that deal. He's there at the autopsy with the doctors that perform it, and he can get different, well, if you have let's say a gunshot
Gunshot, yeah.
victim,
Sure.
they can tell you what the angle was. They have scopes, not scopes, but they're like long, almost like barbecue things without the deals at the end. But
Oh, yeah.
they can put it in the area, like in the head, and come out if it's next to the wound.
Yeah.
They can show you the angle, like was the person standing or was the person kneeling. A lot of them have them or kneel when they execute them in the back of the head, and it'll show the trajectory of the bullet,
I see.
that type of thing. So yeah, you do learn a lot of information at the medical examiner's office.
Interesting. So that does really happen where you see all the details of those come together. And are those pretty valuable details?
Oh yeah.
So they make a big difference.
The only difference between what you're referencing, like NCIS or
Sure.
CSI and that, we never get to solve a homicide in an hour. Their cases are done in an hour.
Sure.
So, but yeah, ours take days and days and months and years.
Yeah.
So
How, are there any cases that, like, are most of the time, like you said, you always want to be able to solve the case, and you want to have as few of the unsolved ones on the shelf. Are there any that like just really, like, is it common to have a lot of unsolved cases, or is it pretty often that you can?
I would tell you that the sheriff's office solves quite a few of their cases. When I was a sergeant, I kept track of, I think we went out to 32 different call-outs, and there were suicides involved with that, and serious ag assaults and homicides and that. And our solve rate was very high. I don't remember what it was, but I want to say it was in the high 20s or whatever, and that was a couple of years in a row. It's gotten harder to solve them because of the amount of illegal activity that comes across the border.
Sure.
So those are the ones. And Phoenix PD, they get so many homicides that they may not even have time to hardly work one.
Right.
They get the crime scene done, and it goes on a shelf because they're going to another crime scene type thing. So when they get time, they get back to it and do what they can. But
In areas like that, like Phoenix, is that just because of, like you mentioned, the illegal aliens coming in and causing more crime, or would that primarily be just the type of environment, people who are in the neighborhood, that type of?
Both.
Both?
Yeah. A lot of domestic violence type
Sure.
situations, but a lot of illegal activity, a lot of gang activity with Phoenix.
Gangs,
Yeah.
okay. And poverty-stricken, that areas that
Right.
probably doesn't aid in that either.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay. What's you mentioned, kind of the last piece when you solve a crime is bringing who you guys suspect is the criminal, and either getting, a confession or they'll deny. Have you ever been in a interrogation room where I'm sure you have, but what's that process like when you bring them in, you're questioning them, trying to get a confession, and how do you get a confession? Is that just through questioning? Are they usually easy to give up their confession? I would assume it's probably not, but
It's through questioning, just interrogation techniques. There's a lot of schools that we attend on what's the best way to approach those types of things. So, a lot of people will, in the sheriff's office, for some reason, we usually had multiple suspects, that would go out and kill somebody. When you get one of them to talk, the other three or two are done.
Right.
You've got them in that. So, and you can even play part. Well, here's what he said. Blah blah blah. So it's just technique more than anything, I would say.
Was that a pretty common technique? Was kind of turning one against the other? Is that what was most useful typically, or?
Absolutely, that was good when there were multiple. If you could get one to talk, you pretty well knew what happened then.
Right, and what was, just because you've been around it, what typically leads to someone confessing? Is it do they? I'm assuming they don't want to confess their crime. I would assume.
I think some of them it's guilt.
Okay.
I think some of them realize this is my chance to kind of get this off my chest. I'll take my chances with the courts.
Right.
I think that, again, good homicide detectives have a lot of good techniques that they use on suspects that, like I said, they're sitting at a bar or whatever, and they're telling somebody, "Oh, I killed so-and-so." Well, now we have 2 or 3 people that are telling us that, and we verify that. And, when we bring that up, you can just see them kind of sink in the chair like, "Okay, you got me," type thing.
Yeah.
But a lot of them play hardball to the end and will never admit anything.
Really? Mm-hmm. Huh. So they'll just deny, go to court, deny, and and then at that point it just comes down to the jury and the evidence.
Yeah, and the physical proof that we've got. Like I said, nowadays DNA is very, very popular. DNA's, I don't know what the numbers are, but you commit a crime, it's 1 in, I don't know, 100 million that you're the one, like that. So there's a lot of evidence. We don't go to court. The county attorneys won't take it to court unless there's a lot of evidence, and they like to have a statement from the person also. But
what's it like being, because you mentioned you've had times where you had to go into court and be a part of that part of the process. What's that like?
Well, it's stressful because you've got a prosecutor that you work with, but you've got to take the stand, and then you have a defense attorney that wants to make you look bad, like you did something wrong.
Right.
That's what they're doing nowadays. It's not. They know the guy's guilty.
Yeah.
And
the defense attorney.
The defense attorney. I had a criminal law class at Weber State, way back, but he taught me that he was a second leading defense attorney in the state of Utah. And one day I asked him, how do you represent these people when you know that they're guilty? And he says, I have 2 things. 1, I never let them take the stand. I'm not going to let them get up there and lie about what they did. And 2, my job is to get them the least sentence, the least amount of penalty that I can. And I can live with that. I think that's a good way to look at it. You have defense attorneys that will be just as bad as the suspect as far as lying, but they try to make the police look bad, or that the officers did something wrong, or you invented this evidence,
right?
That type of thing. So
interesting. You obviously mentioned you talked to that one defense attorney who stated, and I agree. I think that's probably the most fair way you could look at it if you're a defense attorney. But what for other defense attorneys, what's the motivation there? Is it just their job and that's what they do? And
yeah, they don't want to lose in court.
I see. And for them, it doesn't. Case is a case, I would assume. Oh, you're good.
Sorry about that.
Oh no, you're good.
Turn that off.
So for them, it's just probably a case is a case, and they just...
Well, they get paid. They get paid either by the court system or by the family, and that. So they want to earn their money.
Have you ever taken the stand? I would assume You have.
Yes, I have.
And what I'm curious kind of what your experience said. It's very stressful, but what maybe is there a story you could tell us or a time where you took the stand and was like what that one that stands out or one that you remember specifically?
I'll give you one that is in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
He was a 17-year-old suspect. There were 4 suspects, and he was the last of the group. He was 17. In Arizona, you're considered an adult when you're 18.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to read everybody their rights before they come in and talk to you. And I was reading this kid's rights, and in Arizona, they came up with this form, the rights are you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you, da-da-da-da-da.
Right.
Well, for juveniles, it was totally different. You went through this thing and you'd say, do you understand your right to this? Or, for example, a judge is the person in the courtroom who oversees the court, blah, blah, blah. Do you understand that?
Oh, it's more of a question.
Yeah, there was a question on there about the rights. And it stated, as a juvenile, you have certain rights. Were your rights read to you, and da 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 da. I can't remember the whole thing. I wish I could. But as I was interviewing him, the end question is, do you want your parent to be here with you?
Oh, I see.
And this kid was a father. Him and his girlfriend were not married, but he was a father.
Yep.
They lived together. And the last thing I wanted was to wait to try to find his parents, because these kids were extremely difficult to find. So I was reading the question, and I thought, when I read the question, all the questions on the sheet, word perfect. But when I got to this question, the last part of it is, do you want a parent to be with you? Well, I changed that around. I said, you're a dad, right? He goes, yeah. I said, so you've been on your own for a while? Yeah. And you live with so-and-so. You don't live with your parents anymore, right? And he goes, yeah. I said, well, do you want one of your parents to be here with you then? So I asked the question,
right,
but I just changed it, softened it up so
right.
he would say yes. And he said yes. Well, I got torn into pieces by the defense attorney for that.
Really?
Yeah, he had the tape of our tape, and he'd play the first question. Do you understand your rights or whatever it was? Yes. And he goes, that's word perfect, isn't it? I said, on the stand, yes. Then he asked the next question. That's word perfect, isn't it? Yes. He did that, I think, through about 5 or 6 questions. Then he came up to this question. And he goes, you asked the first part of that question word perfect, but the next line is, do you want your parents to be with you? That's not what you asked him, is it? I said, yeah, I asked him that question. He goes, no, you said da-da-da-da-da, and he's playing this for the court, for the judge, and he says, then gets down to, you're a dad, all that. You don't need your parents here with you, do you? Like that.
Yeah.
And so, he ripped me up on the stand. He goes, why is that the only question that wasn't word perfect? The rest of the questions on the sheet are all word perfect. Just read it like that. Well, the funny thing about that sheet is that's only a sheet used by Maricopa County. One of the Maricopa County attorneys made that sheet up.
Okay.
So really all you have to do is read them their rights off your rights card.
Right.
But he wanted it read that way. So anyway, but he ripped me into pieces over that. The judge...
All right, and we're back. So we were talking about. Oh yes, you're sharing the story about when you were in court and the lawyer.
Anyway, I was sweating bullets because I was thinking, the judge is gonna throw this confession out because we needed it for the case.
Sure.
And that, well, he ruled in my favor. He ruled that I did ask the question.
Yeah.
That it was fine that I did. That he's an adult. he pointed out that he was a father. He had custody of a baby, so he asked the question, "Do you want your parents here?"
Yeah.
He just said, "You don't need them here, do you?" So they ruled in my favor, but it was a very stressful time on the stand.
Right. Did is that did he end up being tried as an adult, or how did that?
Yeah, he was tried as an adult.
I see.
Well, there were 4 suspects, and they were all found guilty.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Is that pretty typical as far as like when you're on the stand? Is it as stressful as that, or was that kind of just a unique situation?
Well, it's always stressful when you pretty well know what the prosecution's gonna ask you because you work with them.
Right.
But it's always stressful when the defense attorney gets up there and thinks that they know a lot more about it than you do. So,
Sure.
you end up a lot of times disagreeing with them, shooting their theories down and that. So,
I see.
and good defense attorneys, like I said, most of them know what their client did and that they're guilty.
Right.
So
they're just trying to get as small a sentence as possible.
yes, hopefully.
Yeah. On homicide, do most go to court, or do they settle, or how does that
Most of them plea out.
plea out? Okay.
Yeah.
And does it usually always involve jail time? Is that usually how that works?
Oh, yeah.
That's interesting. I guess I'm curious about if someone's really intrigued, like by being a detective. What is something that because you obviously had people that you trained, what are the key aspects that you were looking for in someone who wanted to be a detective?
First off, it was desire.
Sure.
Second, are they a hard worker or not?
Mm-hmm.
Because, you work with a group of people, and most of the people that wanted to come into homicide already worked in my building, so I knew who they were. I knew if they were hard workers or not. And sometimes what we would do is we would hold an oral board and put it out there to get names for people that were interested. And we knew reputation,
Sure.
hard work. I mean, I can teach somebody how to come in and learn what we do in homicide. I can't teach you to be a hard worker.
Right.
You either have that or you don't.
Right.
So that's what I would look for, is somebody that was a hard worker.
What's the typical range, I guess, for how long does it take to promote your way up, get promoted to that position?
Well, in our office, detective isn't necessarily a promotion from being a patrol deputy, and there's a lot of other areas that you can work in our office, but most homicide detectives have been on 7 to 10 years, I would say, or more.
Okay.
Some less, but not a lot.
Interesting.
Maybe 5 years. I don't know.
Would you say that's just time learning the job and then showing that you're committed to be on the force?
Most of them that come in are detectives in other areas.
Oh, okay.
Like I said, that they might be working sexual assaults. They might be working simple assaults. They might be working robbery, theft, and that. So most of them have detective background.
Oh,
It's just, and they make their name doing those detective jobs. If they have a good name, those are the people that you want because they're hard workers.
right. Is there a pretty big difference between the types of detective kind of lines of focus? Obviously, said, sexual assault, domestic, things like that.
Yeah, we have a sexual assault unit that a lot of people, they don't want to come to homicide. They get in there and they like doing what they're doing there, or they're a district detective where they do a little bit of everything. So they may not want to come down. It takes a special interest to want to go to homicide.
Really? Yeah.
And they see that the cases that we work are volumes. I had one case where if you took the 3-inch or 2-inch black notebooks, I had paperwork in there for 7 volumes of those.
Oh, wow.
So it's a lot of paperwork.
Right.
You're not out there, like Phoenix PD, you're on scenes a lot more. For us, we may go we may get one day, one 6 hours later, one a day after, but that doesn't happen very often. It's more like you get one, the other team's on call for a week or two, they get one, your team's back up. So it could be one like in a month type thing. So you have a lot of time to work it, and everything you do requires paperwork. Like when you go make the next of kin notification, you're writing a supplement about that. You're writing on your notepad, you're writing names down of people they may give you. When you interview somebody, you're writing a paperwork on that. Everything, when you go to the autopsy, you're writing paperwork on that. So there's a lot of paperwork involved with it. And some people just don't want to do it.
Is there a reason why homicide would have so much more than like a sexual assault case as far as paperwork goes?
Probably because if there is, I didn't work sexual assaults, but I would imagine some of those have a lot of paperwork. But most of those, the victim knows who the suspect is.
Oh, okay.
So that cuts out a lot. We're out there grinding, trying to figure out every lead that we can find. So.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. There's more pieces to put together.
Yeah, and it's more controlled. Usually those are more in a controlled environment.
That makes sense. I would assume the hard part with those ones too is like, is there usually a gap of time between when they come in or they hear about the assault?
Yeah, their sexual assault call out would be a lot less than regular call outs.
Interesting. Okay. That makes sense though. When you're filling out those reports, what, like, does it have to be pretty detailed or?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
because you're going to court on it. You're writing a report for yourself. For your sergeant's going to review it. Your lieutenant should be reviewing it. The county attorney's going to review it to see if there's enough information to get charges. And he may send you out. He may say, a little bit weak here. You need to go re-interview so-and-so.
Oh.
That type of thing.
Yeah.
So the case doesn't end. I mean, when we get called out to the dead body until it's convicted in court. So you could be doing a lot of work in between there. And everything you're doing, you're documenting.
Interesting. So really, you're kind of the man in the middle collecting all the information, and it can go between multiple people, and you may have to go back, collect a little bit more. And
Yep, absolutely.
Interesting. Because I guess you are working hand in hand to build a case against that individual, whoever the individual is.
Right.
Huh. I didn't think about that. That's really, you don't get that in the 1 hour episode of NCIS. That's interesting. So I know we've been going for a bit. I kind of have one final question, and I guess it would be, because we've talked a lot about law enforcement and then also what it takes to be in law enforcement. And I think there is a lot of people who, that commitment to a career or a path, that would be a struggle for them. Just this generation trying to figure that out and just knowing what it takes, the effort and the work. What would be your advice? Because you've worked with a lot of young people as well, and obviously people in your work career path in law enforcement. What would be your advice just in general to the upcoming generation, people trying to find their path in life, whether it's law enforcement or a different career?
I think the thing I would say is you need to be engaged, and you need to be engaged in something. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be engaged in law enforcement. You don't have to be engaged in college. But if you are, be engaged.
Right.
Do your best. Do hard work. I think that's the key to everything. I remember one of our bishops, Bishop Richardson, used to tell the youth all the time, you guys need to learn how to do hard work.
Yeah.
And I believe that. And I believe that with people that are wanting to, any skill that they want to have, that they want to develop, just work hard at it, don't give up. I think we have a generation now that wants to, if it gets tough, if it gets hard, well, I'm just going to switch and do something else.
Right.
So that would be what I would say to them is back to hard work.
Yeah.
And desire. You got to have a desire to do anything anymore.
Right.
Like, for example, if you're looking at, your families and that, and you're dating somebody and you have a desire to get married, well, what's the next step to get married?
Yeah.
You got to think of those things, and
Right.
you can scratch all that. That was simply for you.
I can see the smile on your face as you were saying it.
But no, I honestly believe that just what is it you want to do? I think generation to generation, if you look back at, like you can look back at your grandparents, what did they do? They were hard workers.
Right.
They worked out in the fields, and they taught their children to work out in the fields, right? And to go out there and work hard in that. So that generation, their children, your dad, for example, my generation, we learned to work hard. We learned to be engaged in that. And, I'm not saying the next generation down, probably the same. But now it's like I said, I don't like it, I'm going to quit.
Right.
You can't have that attitude.
Right.
Got to have the attitude that to be successful, you're going to have to do something.
Well, I mean, I think you bring up a good point. It's like, especially if you live in a area where it's a great community and people have a lot of resources potentially. It's I don't know what that phrase is, but it's the good times make weak men make bad times make strong men make good times. It's that kind of that cycle. And I think we do live in a lot of areas where people are really well off and blessed, and it doesn't require, like you said, that my grandparents had to work in the field just to survive, and then they taught their kids that, and their kids taught that, and you get a couple generations that can go away pretty quickly if they don't have that push, maybe it is, or that necessity, or at least that instilled in them.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Todd, this has been a lot of fun. I know we've been setting it up for a while, and I've been excited to hear about it. I've learned a lot because we've known each other for quite a while, but there's just so much to your career, law enforcement, I didn't know, and I loved hearing about it, so I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
And we'll have to have you back on another time.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks.